Ezekiel's prophecy begins with a sky that rips open, a moment so fierce it silences the breath and freezes the soul. Beneath that burning tear in heaven, the prophet stands on the banks of the Kebar River, exiled, stripped of his temple, his homeland, his identity, yet chosen to see what no mortal was meant to behold. 4 living creatures move as one, their faces a lion, an eagle, an ox, and a man, their eyes unblinking, their wheels within wheels turning like the mind of God itself. This is not a vision confined to ancient parchment. This is the book of Ezekiel alive before you, breathing, speaking, reaching into the marrow of your doubt to awaken what has long been dry. For centuries, the valley of dry bones, the wheel within a wheel, the thunder of Gog and Magog, and the promise of the river of life have been wrapped in mystery, guarded, misunderstood, or ignored. Why would God appear in Babylon, a place his people believed he would never come? What secret is hidden in the new temple vision that could reshape our understanding of the end times? Why does the prophecy still speak to our generation with such unshakable urgency? In this journey, you will see the book of Ezekiel unfold in fire and breath. You will walk through the shadows of false prophets and the faithless bride. You will feel the trembling of the nations under God's global justice, and you will stand at the river whose waters heal even the Dead Sea. Let these words be more than history. Let them be a summons to your spirit. Share in the comments what vision stirs in your own heart. Subscribe and keep watch, for the Lord is there. And once you see his glory, you will never be the same again. The priest without a temple. He had been trained from birth to walk in the courts of the temple, to tend the golden lampstand, to breathe in the fragrance of incense that rose like a living prayer. Ezekiel, son of Buzi, carried the weight of the priesthood in his bloodline. Every detail of his life was woven with the expectation that one day he would stand before the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem. But Babylon stripped all of that away. The city was gone from his sight. The temple was unreachable, and the Ark of the Covenant was only a memory whispered in exile. Imagine the silence of his mornings by the Kebar River. No psalms echoing in the stone chambers, only the heavy air and the distant groans of a displaced people. This was the kind of silence that crushes the heart, the kind where hope becomes a brittle thing that can break at the slightest touch. Yet it was into this silence that the voice of the Almighty broke like a flood. Here lies the first lesson. God's presence is not bound by walls or rituals. He comes to the broken, to the scattered, to the ones who believe they've been forgotten. How many today sit in their own Babylon thinking the glory has departed, not realizing it can meet them in the very place they least expect? Reflect on your own life. Where have you built walls around where God can show up? Share your thoughts, for in the telling we often find the cracks where his light enters. And from this shattered priesthood, a prophet would rise. The vision of glory beyond walls. The moment came without warning. The sky did not politely part. It tore open, the way a sword tears through the fabric of battle. Out of the north, a storm cloud churned with fire and lightning, and in its heart, a brilliance like molten metal. Ezekiel's eyes strained against the impossible shapes emerging from the blaze. 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces. A man, a lion, an ox, an eagle, facing every direction at once, their movements flawless, never turning, guided by the Spirit himself. Beside them, wheels within wheels, their rims covered in countless eyes, seeing all, missing nothing. Above them, an expanse like crystal, and beyond that a throne of sapphire, burning with the radiance of one whose form was like a man, yet glowed with unapproachable fire. This is more than a vision. It is the revelation of a God who cannot be contained. The wheel within a wheel whispers of his omnipresence and perfect order. The eyes all around declare his omniscience. When his glory moves, no barrier can restrain it. Not geography, not exile, not the arrogance of human kings. Think of the times in your own life when God's presence has broken through the most unlikely circumstances. Comment them, for your testimony may be the vision another weary soul needs to keep standing. And in this moment, Ezekiel understood. The Lord of Jerusalem was also the Lord of Babylon. The God of the temple was the God of the riverbank. What followed would demand more than awe. It would require surrender. The sweet and bitter scroll. Then came the hand, reaching from the blaze, holding a scroll covered in writing on both sides. It was no ornamental parchment. It pulsed with divine weight. "Son of man, eat what I give you," the voice said. As the scroll touched his tongue, sweetness like honey filled his mouth, the kind of sweetness that makes you close your eyes in wonder. But the sweetness was not the whole story. The words within were laments, mourning, and woe, a river of truth that would cut as deep as it healed. This is the paradox of God's word. It nourishes even as it wounds, it comforts even as it confronts. Many in our generation hunger only for the honey, avoiding the bitterness that exposes idols, pride, and rebellion. But a prophet cannot be selective. To eat the scroll is to take in all of it, the gentle and the fierce, and let it become part of you until you speak not from opinion, but from the very breath of God. Think of the times when truth has been both your healing and your undoing. Was it not in those moments that transformation began? If we dare to receive the whole message, our lives themselves become the scroll others can read. This is what Ezekiel embodied. A man so saturated with God's word that even in the face of rejection, his voice would not falter. The sweetness would sustain him, the bitterness would shape him, and from this divine meal he would rise into a mission that would shake both the exiled and the proud, preparing us for the living prophecies to come. Acting out the message, the theater of prophecy. The call was not only to speak, but to become the message, to let his very life turn into a living prophecy. God's instructions to Ezekiel were not abstract. They were grueling, humiliating, and impossible to ignore. He was told to take a clay brick, etch Jerusalem into it, and build a miniature siege against it while the exiles watched. Some scoffed at what looked like a child's game, but the silent weight of that act was unbearable, for it declared the city's fate long before the armies arrived. Then came the days of lying on his side, 390 for the sin of Israel, 40 more for Judah, his body aching, the dust clinging to his skin, the eyes of his neighbors watching him like a spectacle. He ate bread baked over cow dung, a sign of the defilement that would fall on his people. Each act was a sermon without words, searing itself into the minds of those who saw. How do you ignore a man who becomes the prophecy he preaches? We live in a world still deaf to plain warnings. Sometimes the truth must be embodied so vividly it refuses to leave your sight. Have you ever been called to live out something so that others might see what they will not hear? Share it, for these are the living parables God still writes on the pages of human life. From here, the prophet would see even deeper into the shadows that had consumed the holy place. The Temple of Shadows. The Spirit lifted him into a vision that carried the weight of betrayal. He was taken to the temple, once the heartbeat of Israel's worship. But what he saw there was not the glory of God, but the filth of idolatry hidden in plain sight. At the entrance stood the image of jealousy, a bold affront to the Almighty. Inside, 70 elders burned incense to creeping things and carved idols, their hearts as cold as the stone walls. Women wept for Tammuz, a god of death and false renewal, while priests turned their backs on the sanctuary to bow before the rising sun. The scene was not just ancient history, it is the mirror of every age when sacred spaces become stages for self-worship. How many modern temples, churches, ministries, even personal faith turn inward to idols of power, fame, or comfort? The danger is subtle. The rituals remain, the words sound holy, but the gaze of the heart has shifted. God's grief over the temple's defilement is the same grief over our divided loyalties today. If he walked through the corridors of our worship, what would he find? Comment honestly, for the confrontation with truth is the first step toward cleansing. And with the unveiling of the temple's corruption came the urgent need to expose the voices that kept the people numb. The comfort of lies. False prophets. Exposed. Into this landscape of decay, God's word cut like a blade. Prophesy against the prophets who follow their own spirit and have seen nothing. These men and women were skilled in crafting illusions. They plastered cracked walls with false mortar, painting over judgment with promises of peace that God had never spoken. Their voices soothed the people into complacency, whispering that Jerusalem would never fall, that the covenant excused their rebellion. It is a dangerous comfort, the kind that keeps a soul asleep on the edge of a cliff. Ezekiel's task was to strip away the illusion, to announce that the wall would collapse and the false peace would shatter. Even the women who wove charms and sold blessings were named, those who ensnared lives for profit, strengthening the hands of the wicked while crushing the righteous. The deception was not just theological, it was a deep violation of justice and mercy. In our own time, the false prophets may not wear robes, but they speak from platforms, social feeds, and pulpits, telling people only what they want to hear. How many lives have been lost to the seduction of easy truths that cost nothing? The healing comes when we hunger for the whole counsel of God, not the curated parts. The mark of a true word is that it calls the sinner to life and the righteous to endurance. This was Ezekiel's burden, to be the voice that breaks the trance, even when the crowd turns away. From here, the narrative plunges into the most intimate and piercing image yet, a covenant betrayed like a marriage gone unfaithful, and a love that still aches for restoration, the faithless bride. In the vision, Jerusalem is not a fortress or a city of stone. She is a woman, a bride once rescued from the filth of abandonment. God found her as a newborn, cord uncut, left in her own blood in an open field. No one pitied her, no one cared to wrap her in swaddling or wash her clean. But he came near, knelt beside her, and spoke the word that gives life: live. He covered her nakedness, fed her, clothed her in embroidered garments, adorned her with jewels until her beauty became the talk of nations. She was his, bound to him by covenant love. Yet her beauty turned inward. She fell in love with her own reflection and used his gifts to court other lovers. She raised altars on every corner, sacrificed even the children he had given her to idols of stone and fire. It is the tragedy of a heart that receives grace and then spends it on betrayal. The lesson is personal. Any of us can become the faithless bride when we take God's blessings and turn them towards self-worship or compromise. What in your life was once a gift for his glory, but has drifted toward another altar? Speak it, for confession is the soil where restoration can grow. Yet even here, his anger is braided with longing. Judgment comes, but beneath it beats the heart of a bridegroom who still dreams of reconciliation, dry bones, and the breath of life. The Spirit carried him to a valley so silent it almost screamed. Bones lay scattered across the ground, bleached by years of sun, brittle as dust. They were not skeletons in neat rows. They were fragments, ribs here, skulls there, leg bones piled with no order. Son of man, can these bones live? The question pierced deeper than the scene before him, for it was also about Israel's soul and every heart that had surrendered to despair. He answered with the only truth possible. O Lord God, you know. Then came the command, speak to the bones. The prophet's voice broke the stillness, declaring that breath would enter them, that sinews would form, flesh would cover them. The ground trembled, the bones rattled into alignment, the sound like an army assembling from the dust. Yet they lay still, lifeless, until the second command came, call to the breath from the four winds. As the breath entered, they rose, a vast army where moments ago there had been only death. This is not just a national resurrection, it is a personal one for every soul convinced it is beyond revival. The valley is where God proves that no hopelessness is final. If He can make dry bones stand, He can make your spirit rise again. Share your valley. Someone may need your testimony to believe their own resurrection is possible. Judging the nations, global justice of God. The vision widens beyond Israel's borders. God's eyes turn to Ammon, who mocked when the temple fell, to Moab, who said Israel was like all other nations, to Edom, who took vengeance on their weakened brother, to Tyre, who saw profit in Jerusalem's ruin, to Sidon, whose pride despised His name. Each nation is measured not by size or wealth, but by the weight of their actions against God's people and His truth. The principle is unshakable. Whatever is sown will be reaped. This is not vengeance born of pettiness. It is the justice of a king who will not let cruelty or exploitation go unanswered. Even today, the same justice moves. No empire, no corporation, no leader escapes His scale. Consider your own sphere of influence. Do you build on the ruins of others or rejoice when a rival falls? These small seeds grow into harvests of either judgment or blessing. The downfall of the nations is not only a warning, it is a reassurance that God's justice is global, reaching every corner where human pride believes itself untouchable. Gog and Magog, the last siege. In a time of peace, when Israel will live unwalled and unafraid, an enemy will rise, not a lone king but a coalition, a shadow stitched together from many nations, led by Gog of the land of Magog. They will come like a storm over the land, their numbers vast, their intent clear, to plunder, to destroy, to erase. Yet it is God Himself who will draw them into this final confrontation, not to feed their conquest, but to break their power in full view of the world. The earth will quake, mountains will crumble, torrents of rain, hailstones, fire and sulfur will fall. Confusion will turn their swords against each other. The carnage will be so great that it will take 7 months to bury the dead. This is the end of all who gather against the purposes of God. The lesson reaches beyond prophecy charts. No alliance of darkness, no matter how united or vast, can outlast the word He has spoken. In the face of overwhelming opposition, trust that He not only sees, but orchestrates the outcome for His glory. The siege is not the end. It is the doorway to renewal, the new temple and the river that heals. The prophet is lifted to a high mountain where a new city comes into view. A man like bronze measures its gates, courts and chambers with precision, every detail intentional. This is no rebuild of the past. It is a sanctuary untouched by former corruption. As Ezekiel watches, the glory of the Lord returns from the east, the same glory He saw depart before Jerusalem's fall. It enters through the gate, fills the temple, and the voice declares, "This is the place of my throne, where I will dwell among the children of Israel forever." Then the miracle widens. From beneath the threshold, water begins to flow, ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep, until it becomes a river that cannot be crossed. It runs to the Dead Sea, turning its bitter waters sweet, filling it with fish, lining its banks with trees whose leaves bring healing. The river is more than geography. It is the living presence of God flowing outward, bringing restoration to everything it touches. This is the final promise. The story that began in exile ends with a city whose name is "The Lord is there." Where His river flows, death yields to life, and all creation finds its cure. In your own deserts, dare to believe the river will come, and when it does, nothing will remain the same. The vision has carried us from the banks of the Kebar River to the high mountain where the city shines with the name, "The Lord is there." We have walked with Ezekiel through the fire and the whirlwind, through the wheel within a wheel, through the valley of dry bones and the siege of Gog and Magog, until the river of life flowed from beneath the threshold of the new temple. These are not ancient shadows fading on cracked parchment. These are living prophecies, burning with the same glory and urgency now as they did when the heavens split open before a young priest in exile. The prophecy of Ezekiel is not simply a record of Israel's past. It is a mirror held before every generation, revealing our idols, our complacency, our valleys of hopelessness, and our longing for the river that heals. You may not stand in Babylon, but perhaps you know the weight of exile, the seasons when your prayers feel unanswered, your heart feels hollow, and the presence of God seems distant. Yet the message remains unshakable. His glory is not bound to walls or altars. He comes to the scattered, the forgotten, the broken, and when he comes, he brings life where death has made its home. If the valley of dry bones teaches us anything, it is that no situation is too far gone for the breath of God to fill it again. Your valley may be the grief no one else understands, the dream buried under years of disappointment, the faith worn thin by unanswered questions. And yet, one word from him, one breath, can cause the impossible to stand. That is why this prophecy matters now. It is a promise that the same God who judged the nations is the same God who restores. The same God who defends his people is the same God who renews them. This is a God who will confront the false prophets and the faithless bride, not to destroy, but to call back to covenant love, to strip away the lies so that truth can heal. Look around our world. The comfort of lies still seduces. The nations still rise in arrogance. The alliances of Gog and Magog still form in boardrooms, battlefields, and hidden deals. And still, God writes the end before they begin. His justice will not sleep. Every act of cruelty, every mockery of the sacred, every exploitation of the weak will meet the hand that measures the nations. That justice is not vengeance. It is the defense of love, the protection of what is holy, the setting right of what has been broken. And yet, even in the roar of judgment, there is the whisper of hope. The new temple stands not as a relic, but as a declaration. The separation between God and his people is over. From his dwelling flows the river that makes even the Dead Sea teem with life, the river that heals the nations, the river that never runs dry. This river is not just in the visions of prophets. It is meant to flow into your life, into your home, into the desert places you've stopped believing can bloom again. Will you let it? Will you step into its current until it carries you deeper than your feet can touch the ground? Because the truth is, you were made to live in the presence of the Lord, to bear his name, to become a living temple where his Spirit dwells. The Lord is not looking for perfect stonework. He is looking for willing hearts, hearts of flesh, not stone, hearts that will beat in rhythm with his. As we close this journey through Ezekiel's prophecy, ask yourself, where have I settled for the comfort of exile instead of the promise of restoration? Where have I believed the false voices instead of the voice that called me from the field and said, live? These questions are not just for reflection, they are for transformation. Share them in the comments. Let your testimony ignite someone else's courage. Let your questions open a conversation that draws others into the Word. And if this message has stirred something in you, if you felt the breath of hope move through your own valley, I invite you to hold on to it and let it grow. If this video has brought light to your spirit or helped you find clarity in the shadows, I ask you to pour back a little of that light so it can keep shining for others. When you like, subscribe and share, you're not just helping a channel, you're helping carry these words to someone who might be sitting by their own Kebar River, wondering if God still speaks. If you feel led, offer a word of encouragement, a gesture of support, an act of kindness that fuels the creation of more messages like this. Every small offering of energy, every act of engagement becomes a seed in the soil of someone else's faith. Whether it's your voice in the comments, your presence in the community, or your quiet prayer for those who will hear, it matters more than you know. The journey through Ezekiel shows us that God never abandons his own, that he speaks through storms and silence, that he transforms priests without temples into prophets who carry his glory into exile. And now, that same call rests on us, to be watchmen on the walls, to speak the truth in love, to live in such a way that our very lives become signs pointing to the river that flows from his throne. The name of the city is "The Lord is There." Let it also be said of your life, your home, your story, "The Lord is there." May the breath that raised the dry bones breathe on you now. May the river that healed the sea heal every hidden wound. May the glory that filled the temple fill your heart until it overflows. And may you walk from this moment not as one who has merely heard a prophecy, but as one who carries it, lives it, and lets it shine. If you are ready to stand in that calling, to live as a dwelling place of his presence, let your voice be heard. Engage with this message, connect with this community, and keep your heart open for the next word he will speak. Because the story is still unfolding, and the same God who spoke to Ezekiel is speaking still, to me, to you, to all who will listen. The Lord is there, and once you have seen his glory, you will never be the same again.